So I was watching a video by Gikku, who, if you don't know, is a longtime gotcha content creator. He does Black Clover Mobile. I started following his YouTube channel through JJK, and I've now been following through Bleach Soul Resonance. And even though I don't have the biggest connection to those gotcha, I do appreciate his takes. And in this case, he brought up something that is really interesting, which is the idea of a gotcha enhancing the IP through its development. Whereas, and I noticed this when I was playing JJK Phantom Parade, and I have since stopped playing JJK Phantom Parade, is that JJK Phantom Parade does nothing to actually enhance the world of JJK. It simply expects you to want to pull for Gojo and Sukuna and Toji. You don't really get that feeling that they're playing off of one another. And it brought to mind my thoughts on Dokkan, where I was like, does Dokkan actually enhance the Dragon Ball IP in a meaningful way? Or is it kind of like other Dragon Ball projects that you play it because your favorite characters are in it, not because it is a great extension of your characters? Please let me know how you feel about this as I go forward down in the comments. Do you think that Dokkan does enough to engage with the actual source material? Or are you mostly playing Dokkan because it's a Dragon Ball game? Get into it. So if you're new to this channel at all, I tend to talk about design space a lot. Not that I am a game developer, not that I want to be a game developer, just that I come from fighting games, which are usually very intentionally designed. So in a fighting game, if something happens, at least in modern fighting games, it is the intention that that thing happens. And you see a lot in the anime game community where like Bleach Soul Resonance, or not Soul Resonance, the new fighting game, the Arena Fighter, will come out, and people don't understand why certain things are just completely broken, and why, or like if Bandai will patch them at some point. And the answer a lot of times is it'll get patched eventually, but it's not worth patching immediately because they did not create that game with the intention of it being enjoyed competitively. They created that game as an extension of a brand, right? And while I've been looking at that game and seeing some upside, most of the time, whenever people bring up like, oh, is the new Bleach Arena Fighter going to be at EVO? The answer is no, because it's just not a game that is competitive. It doesn't mean people won't play it competitively. It's just not meant to be. Like it's a game they didn't care to make competitive, even with the like glimpses of fighting game intentionality there. In this way, I like to think about Dokkan sometimes of like, what was the intention behind this, right? So intention has become really obvious because of the Festival of Battles. And I guess we'll go back to talking about this character, which we talked about yesterday. But the intention behind this character is that if you're a free-to-play player, he will assist, though not win, you the actual Festival of Battles, right? Who will win you the Festival of Battles? Well, that answer is a little clearer. I guess we'll go here and then Earth Protecting Heroes. The person who will win you the Festival of Battles is this character. So what is the intention behind Vegito? It wasn't only to create a gap in the game, but it was to provide a necessity for pulling on this character. If you are someone who like is just so tired of fusions that you hate Super Vegito, you are incentivized to pull on this character because events power crept in a really interesting way this time around. And by interesting, I mean like quotation marks interesting, not actually interesting. So what we didn't know is that events weren't going to power creep in damage outside of the Festival of Battles. What was going to happen is they were actually going to power creep through HP. If you are playing Dokkan Battle and you do not have access to this character doing countering with ferocious powers, you are at such a risk to get cheesed out by every single new event in the game. They just have so much HP, and it takes so long to kill them without Vegito. The entirety of the Festival of Battles, like game mode essentially, can be surmised as you need to get here and then make Vegito use his active. The rest of this is like a formality. but you need to get here and make him use his active, right? And so we've kind of entered into a space where then we know what Dokkan is doing to us, right? They're incentivizing you to pull on characters who will decisively delete the health bars. But can they do that in a way that's interesting? In the case of Vegito, I actually do think they succeeded. They created Vegito with a lot of intentionality behind him, and because of that, when you play Vegito, you immediately recognize the unique thing that he is doing, and it is very valuable to the IP, I think. I said before the character came out, they give Vegito units counters a lot. You need to make those counters worth doing. If he counterattacks and it's just 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, it's going to feel like fucking ass. So the intention behind him for me was to, 1, give us a reason to exchange, and 2, provide a meaningful reward for putting him in front of, you know, quote unquote danger, even though there's no danger for Vegito right now. Did they succeed with that in the Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta and Vegeta unit, as well as the Gods unit? I would say that in base form, they don't really succeed in pushing this character forward in any meaningful way. And for a lack of better words, I mean, they do the same here. It's the same character. That said, one big thing they do is they provide the same thing I talked about before with this character, which is they made the counters so juicy, but they made it different to Vegito, who is obviously just doing it every single time he's targeted. In this case, he's nullifying the super attacks and blasting the opponent. Typically, to do the type of damage this character is doing with his counter, Vegito would need to be hit a few times while also having quite a bit of stacks up, right? Whereas this character just absolutely erases HP in a single counter, but of course, he's only doing maybe 1, 2, or 3 at, like, you know, at the high end 3 a turn. And it's much more RNG based, right? Whereas this character, I didn't see the vision. This character kind of doesn't push the gods forward in any way. And I would actually argue that I'm a little underwhelmed with their representation as a standalone unit. Not because they're bad at all. They are literally a top 4 character in the game, right? That's not what this conversation is about. I just think the gods aren't actually unique in what they are presenting outside of their damage and how they're doing their damage. You know what I mean? There's not really an aha moment with them. And this is something you see a lot in Dokkan Battle, particularly in the characters who are good or great, but not exactly interesting. So a great example of this is like this Vegeta, who is an amazing character, right? That said, what he does is not exactly like groundbreaking. He's not really stacking towards anything that like leads to a big like oh my god moment, right? Nor is he, yeah, here we go. He's not really stacking towards anything that leads to a big like, you know, giant ape Vegeta moment. He is greatly raising his attack here, but once you actually get into the ape form, you sort of get lost in the actual like effects, which is just like a big damage number, right? You don't feel this mode's power as much as you just feel this guy being a defensive wall. And because Dokkan power is typically predicated on being a defensive wall, it ends up with him, who has this like monstrous ape form, feeling like the same character as Beast Gohan, which is weird, right? Because ape Vegeta and let's say someone like, is he an uncontrollable power? Not surprising to me. Go to planetary destruction. Ape Vegeta should not really be the same as this Broly or this Broly, right? They're uniquely different characters, especially within their series. Vegeta, who's a bit of a blaster, who is certainly not on the destructive level of Broly, should be able to ascend to that peak when he becomes an ape, but instead you just see him being a wall in the same way that this Broly is a temporary wall, right? The only difference is you feel this character's punch, or at least you did back when he first launched, because he had these recurring attacks. He had that invincible state, that overflowing ki dynamic really did feel like you were powering up into a monster. All right. Same with this character feeling extremely dominant and having this like transcendental like state of like, you know, he's reviving, he's supporting, he has an entrance animation, he's filling a domain. The thing this character got the most right about the Super Saiyan Broly from the second movie is that he feels like the most important character on the rotation. Broly steals the spotlight, right? And I feel like so much of the time in Dokkan, characters just sort of fade into the background, and we don't really feel them using Dokkan as a means of driving the IP forward. And maybe that's just like how it's going to be with Dokkan. But one of the things Gikku brought up in his video is that you pull on Dokkan units for the character, and that is unfortunate. And maybe that's just like the life of IP, but there should be a marriage of those concepts. I shouldn't have to pull on, you know, Goku, Ultra Instinct Saiyan Goku, because he's strong. I should want to pull on him because it is the fulfillment of this character in media, right? And I think they got it right with this character, because I think the like domain breaking, the evade cancellation into big counters, into guaranteed counters, into, you know, just at the time being able to blitz through the hardest fight in the game, and again being another character who you could not ignore this character when he released. This character, when he released, changed the dynamic of the game that he was dropped in. He completely dominated every team he was put in because his domain was just too big, right? Like, it was just too big of an impact, and you saw it visibly. You know, the visual of the domain expanding, and the actual like use case defined if certain characters could even make it through the events. Whereas I think they've started to fall short of this this representation a bit, and I think that is, you know, when I say that this character is great, I mean that he is like strong and usable and fun to use, but I don't really mean that like this is who Super Saiyan 2 Gohan is in my mind. One of the big things that I would have loved to see, if you were going to like invoke this character as like an aesthetic, that way that I wasn't pulling for this character just because he was Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, but that I was pulling for this character because he's the actualization of Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, which is that Gohan would have loved the revive mechanic that the 6th anniversary units got, because he is essentially down and out, and then through the father-son Kamehameha, he is able to finish off Cell. Whereas I do think the rest of his kit is extremely accurate to the design and the faithfulness of the series, which is just that, you know, the moment Gohan turned Super Saiyan 2, he was on ass. Like, he was on beats, you know, beating up Cell Jr., beating up Cell. Like, it was a completely different breath poured out into the series, and I think they get that extremely right with this card. But if I'm to nitpick a character that I like, which is Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, I would have loved a revive animation into the father-son Kamehameha. And I guess actually let's look at another full power character, because yeah, this is another great example of a character who aesthetically, I think this character does a lot to faithfully serve the Dragon Ball IP, especially GT, which is not always the best looking series. I know people haven't watched GT in a long time, so they tend to forget that, like, the mushiness of that series. But this character feels like he represents the best aspects of GT in a big way. That said, once you get this character out, you feel like Super Saiyan 4 Goku. Before that point, this, with like the sitting in slot 1 and like, I don't know, it was such boring design, even for the time. Like the day he dropped, it was like a lazy design. And it wasn't lazy because he was just like, you know, going to get blitzed by like Zamasu and then, you know, age out. It was boring because I don't know what it represents for Super Saiyan 4 Goku. And it's just a conversation that is interesting to have when it comes to Dokkan, because I think they have been getting better and better at designing kits, and they become more consistent, but there is still a mismatch of like fumbles baked into characters who I think otherwise have really interesting designs. I'm going to say something that is really hyperbolic and kind of a stretch, but I think Captain Ginyu does more for the design space of Dokkan Battle going forward than 90% of releases I've seen in the last like 2 years, because they actually function as the like platonic ideal of the unit, whereas their issue is that it just doesn't come together. And why is that? It's because Dokkan is just good at making power. They're not good at design a lot of the time. And that's why it's impressive when they pull off characters like the fusions. But if you notice, why are these characters so similar? It's because they could only do it once, right? Dokkan was not confident in the fact that they could pull off another Vegito that was his own character. They were confident that they had made a great Gogeta and Vegeta design. And while they are different enough, they're similar enough to me to mean that like they were going to just leave the rest on the like drawing board. They were like, we don't have it in us. We can't make this guy again, you know? And that's why it feels like the base forms of these units are so wishy-washy. It's because like it's the same unit tweaked, but there's not enough space in the tweaking to make them as good, which is why people say they have a lot of trouble with this character and then they really like this character, right? Is because, you know, they couldn't make them exactly the same, and what does that leave Dokkan? And so does it become a problem with Dokkan as a game, or does it become a problem with the design space? I've seen a lot of Dokkan concept makers out there, and I'll look through their stuff sometimes, and I see the Dokkan-ness of some of their concepts, where it's very much just, I need to make the best character possible without any of like the, I need to make the most interesting character possible. And I think for me, I would always rather a character be interesting, because when Dokkan messes up numbers, you get Omega Shenron. Alright? When Dokkan uses its old, like it just falls back on like, oh, we'll just be Dokkan Battle, you get a character who's like, okay, yeah, all this looks good, except for, oh, for GT bosses. So he's terrible, because he's all numbers. You know? One of the biggest issues with Omega Shenron is that he's just all of these numbers stacked on top of each other and conditionally. And I think that if Dokkan wants to move forward for the long term, I'm hoping that 2025 has shown us that they're really interested in expanding their toolkit. That way we get characters who are solid like Jiren. But what is Jiren's design issue? It's that you essentially never want to be here. And that is a problem. This doesn't do anything for Jiren as a character in the series. You're telling me Jiren as a character in the series is going to get frauded out by Goku and Frieza, just like and I mean like Red Zone Goku and Frieza, even though he released at the same time as the fight? I guess it's canon, but it is kind of weird that like we're now years into the game and full power Jiren feels kind of unplayable because he just gets his ass beat by that fight. Like he just dies to it. Even though he has all these numbers, right? He's a numbers guy. It's like, I wanted Jiren to act like Jiren. I wanted to put Jiren in slot 1 in front of the super and for him to take that shit. And you could age him out later, but it is a huge misstep to not allow someone who is a Jiren fan, let's say, to have the power fantasy of Jiren actually tanking. Like, they were jumping him. Like, they were jumping dude, right? So I don't know. It does feel weird when the solitary iron wall gets frauded out by Goku and Frieza in the fight he was released for in slot 1, and you're just like, oh well, okay. I guess instead, this is actually what this Jiren card is. He's just a support. Does that seem like the IP is being done justice? That Jiren is just like a floating support? Is that who Jiren was? I don't think so. So yeah, little talking head point video where we just discussed some of the limitations and some of the experimentation that has gone on in Dokkan, how they've succeeded recently, and how I want to see more of that success rather than some of these fumbles. But yeah, with all that being said, like the video if you like the video, subscribe to join the club. We all gonna make it, and shout out Gikku for this talking point. Peace.